instances and energies that are at play, for example, with the Bifrost, like there's no good reason that would be immediately apparent for two people to end up at the same place, having, sort of gotten off the Rainbow Bridge at two different places, right? Like you should be at like two like separate
completely
ends of the
different.
galaxy.
Yes, yeah. But what I thought was interesting and cool was how like Loki fell out of the Bifrost like 2 seconds before Thor and got to Sakaar 2 weeks before him.
Right. Yeah, and that's another thing that they mentioned that's kind of cool. But again, I wish there had been some sort of reason for, like, why does time flow differently on Sakaar? Like,
I don't think it would be that it flows differently on Sakaar. I would think it flows differently based on how you got there. Like, so I'm imagining.
No, that's supposed to be the whole deal, that time flows differently on Sakaar. Like,
Oh,
and that's
really?
why, because Jeff Goldblum says, like, time works different here. Out there, I would be, millions and millions of years old.
Okay. Okay, well, I guess that makes sense, but it's dumber than my explanation. So, trust me, my explanation was super cool and sciencey, but I'm not going to get into it because it doesn't it doesn't have any bearing.
Yay! We're not doing irrelevant stuff. Huzzah! We're getting
Okay,
better at this.
Back to the relevant stuff. So here's one thing I love about this movie, as far as like non-confectioner sugar deep stuff, is like and this is one reason why I love the MCU to begin with, including like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and things like that, is it continues the thread, like the trend of the characters are continuing to like change and grow and mature.
Yeah.
And I mean, that happened with Thor and Loki in this movie. Valkyrie as well.
Sure.
I'm trying to think of like some other ones, and even Banner, like, like he kind of went through a rough time there with 2 years of the Hulk having the wheel, and like that had never happened before, and so it's sort of like I think that adds more depth to his character, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that he had a hard time reconciling himself with the concept that he had not been in control for 2 entire years.
Yes,
and that made him freak out some. Like that. Yeah. That's a good like character choice.
Yep, exactly. And like, Thor coming to the realization, well, it was one of those things where it's like, I think one of the deep themes of this movie is when your whole world gets torn apart. Like your reality is just like shattered. And that's what happened when Thor realized like he's not the firstborn. He has a sister. She's evil. He goes back to Asgard and sees all of the old paintings on the ceiling.
Yeah.
And so like the history of Asgard was completely different than he imagined.
Yeah.
And so his whole world falls apart, and he has to sort of like pick up the pieces and put back together like who he is, who or what Asgard is, and like how we move on from this. So like Ragnarok is actually very symbolic, just as much as it is a very real like destruction of Asgard, right? And I really liked that about this movie. And, I liked how, he came to grips with, I liked the reveal that like his hammer did nothing for him, really, other than being a really cool weapon. Like he didn't draw his power from the hammer like he thought he did.
Yes.
And I just thought that was a really cool, sort of coming of age. And to me, this is like how this movie in a very real way, like ties back to the Dark World and the original Thor, is like all of these movies have been like this sort of like growing up of Thor as a character.
Sure.
And in this movie, he comes into this realization that like he is the god of thunder. He doesn't need a hammer to channel the thunder,
So it's interesting that I'm glad that you brought it to that point, because that's something that I wanted to mention. That this movie makes actually a really significant departure from the portrayal of Thor, in that it leans into the whole concept of these beings actually kind of being gods
of something. Yeah.
Of something, right. Because before, like, it had been explicitly and repeatedly said, we're not gods. And in this movie, sort of all of a sudden, they kind of are.
Yeah, I can see that.
And so just that, you know, we've been sort of prepped for, you know, however many movies before that, for 15 movies before that, with all of the ridiculous comic book stuff. And like, and it's, you know, oh, we're aliens, we're just really advanced. And maybe that's still the story, but like to just go ahead and say, you know, are you the god of hammers?
Yeah.
And maybe
I think it's both. I think they're not gods, but like from a certain perspective, you could say, you know, like from a certain perspective they are, and from a certain perspective they're not. Like they're not totally immortal.
Right.
They're not gods in the conventional sense, like they should be, you know, ruling over the people of Earth, you know, or whatever. But they are in the sense of like there are certain specific things that they're good at, I guess,
sure,
to a degree that no human would ever be, you know. And I mean, even Hela as the goddess of death, like she needed the eternal flame to bring things back from the dead.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's talk about
like
Hela though, just for a second, because I'm afraid that Hela also just suffers from MCU villainitis. Okay.
Explain what that is and then why.
Well, and I don't know that I have actually coined that phrase. Maybe hasn't been a lot of like that actual like version of it. But to me, MCU villainitis is the curse of most Marvel villains to be kind of one note and forgettable and not be really good characters. Some villains subvert that and like don't fall into that trap. We just talked about Guardians 2, and Ego is certainly one of those villains who is a good
and Loki,
villain.
We can't forget about Loki.
And of course, and I was just about to say, Loki is obviously not one of those villains because he kind of swings back and forth on the whole villain spectrum. I think that even though his plan was like too contrived and complicated, Helmut Zemo from Civil War is a good villain. But I think Hela is she's just another like powerful bad guy with a grudge, and there's not a lot to her character except I'm angry with the hero.
Nah, I have to disagree with you on this one.
Tell me why I'm wrong.
I think she's a great villain, and not like the best, not like Loki tier, right? But in the same way of Loki and Odin, like she doesn't think she's doing wrong, you know. I think she has more depth than just like, twirly mustache villain, I'm just evil for evil. Like, you can actually see, like, she's shocked that the Asgardians don't welcome her and, like, don't understand.
See, and that's actually another problem that I have with her whole story is that really Odin and Frigga are the only Asgardians who were around when she was, and everybody else is new and don't remember her.
Okay, yeah, I could see that as a yeah, that's a good point. Okay, that's definitely a good thing, or a good point of, you know, that raises eyebrows. But maybe some of them do. Maybe that's why they didn't, you know, because I feel like we can't really say that they don't remember her.
Right, Valkyrie remembers her too. There's 3.
Like, I know, like, Valkyrie... No, but I'm saying, like, maybe some of the other people do remember her. Like, the only person that really didn't know who she was one of Thor's little, like, warrior buddies.
Hogun.
Yeah, and he came from a different realm. Remember?
Yes. So, I don't know. Like, I still I have a problem with that, with the timeline of that. It doesn't make sense to me. But, honestly, like... And
I'm just saying,
I do see your point.
It could be that they do remember her, and that's one reason why. But here's the thing that I like about it is, like, Hela came from a completely different time in Asgard. She's been gone this entire time.
Right.
So she comes back expecting Asgard to be the same. Like, it was completely different back then. It's like they were basically like a warlike race, you know? And so,
Yeah.
and so she expects, you know, and like the whole culture has changed and evolved. Actually, this gets into something I wanted to talk about, because originally I was like, this doesn't make sense. But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, maybe it does. Like, I thought it was weird that it would be so dark in the past. And like, why would Odin like change so suddenly? But then I think about how like long they live.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about Earth's history, right? If you think about the Old Testament, like the history of the nation of Israel, like think about back then where like it was just sort of accepted that kings go to war against each other.
Yeah.
And like kill everybody else and take over. Like that wasn't an evil thing to do, you know, like back then.
Right. Now, see, my
and so, like,
perception...
fast forward to like thousands of years in the future, and everybody in our culture on Earth looks at it as like going conquering is like a terrible genocidal thing.
Right.
You know? And so, like, if you imagine that Hela comes from this culture of, you know, we're uniting these kingdoms by force for like the prosperity of like the entire kingdom once we get it united, she thinks it's a good thing. And yes, she's a bit deranged and likes to kill way too much, but like she was like hailed as like, you know, this great general, you know, and so she comes back to what she thinks is going to be like this, you know, yay, she's back to lead us to, you know, the future we were supposed to go to, and like it's not there. And so then it's like, you know, well, these peasants are dirt. You know, like
so I see your point on that. Here's my take on it. Yes, there is a past to Asgard that Odin is not comfortable with. Was it really as like violent as Hela perceives it to be? Because the only window that we really have into this past on Asgard is what Hela tells us. And
well, we
and what
also
we
have
see,
the paintings.
yes, and what we see in the paintings. So, you know, the idea of you know, forming this kingdom of the 9 realms by force. You know, I honestly, I just don't think we have enough information to really make a judgment on that. You know, but what we do know is that at some point Odin saw in Hela a thirst for violence that was beyond the pale. And so that's why I'm left with the impression of Hela as just kind of like, and yes, she's the hero of her own story, but that in itself does not make a good villain. A good villain is one who is logically consistent with themselves, and also one whose perspective you could kind of see. And like, yay, all the big knives, like that's not really a perspective that most people are going to be able to get behind.
Yeah, you definitely don't empathize. They don't make you empathize with Hela at all.
Yeah,
really.
And that's why I say that that's for me, that's like the main symptom of MCU villainitis. Okay.
Well, I don't think that makes somebody a bad villain. Like you can't empathize with all of them. I mean, come on. I mean, are we going to empathize with Thanos?
Maybe. Who knows?
I don't know. I kind of doubt it. But maybe.
I honestly, I kind of hope so. Like, I hope that there's like some sort of really compelling reason why snuffing out the life of half the universe is going to sound like a good idea. Yeah.
So here's something that bothered me in this movie, and it might just be because I've forgotten the history of the MCU before this, but where the heck is Sif?
Yeah.
What is Sif?
I think there was a reason. Oh, well, so the reason that she's not in this movie is because that actress is busy on a TV